Hello. So before, I contemplated making this video, I was just thinking about just after I surrendered my will to God, just how he forewarned me that I was going to be criticized by people. And, not only was I criticized by family members who didn't know Jesus, but I was also criticized by those in the church. Of course, there were, you know, a handful of people who understood what I was doing for God. But then there's also a handful of other people who choose to see you from the world's perspective. And you have to wonder why that is. And of course, I didn't understand it. I said in another video that here I'm doing something for God. I'm listening to him. I'm following his instructions. You would think people would like praise you for doing that very thing. Excuse me. But they didn't. You know, I received harsh criticism. I recall there was this one lady that was teaching a class in church, and she ends up saying, I think to my mother when I wasn't around, she asked him, have I found a job? And my mother was like, no. God put him into rest. That's what God called it, rest. He wanted me to rest in him. And so she shoots back from what I heard. His meaning of rest is wrong. And, you think about that, just how presumptuous somebody can be, that since they are older, they know better than you do. So if that was the case, that means that anybody that God has called that is young like me, young like Timothy in the Bible, well, they just need to be dismissed, because God can never use them until, I guess, apparently you reach a certain age. So for her to say that, she was speaking as the viewpoint of somebody in this world. She wasn't speaking from the heart of God or from the mind of God. And there are Christians that can choose to operate, either from the flesh or from the spirit. And you can always tell which ones are, is by putting out there something from the spirit. Something from the spirit is going to conflict with the world, because the ways of the world and the ways of the spirit are in war with each other, because they're operating on two different levels. Mammon has run the world by Satan's grasp. So Satan uses mammon to move people from either accepting God or following him. So Satan will use anything that he can to deter people from God. He has been successful in deterring Christians from God. Now, Christians can accept Jesus in their hearts. They can go to church on Sundays. They can read their word, go to Bible studies. Yeah, that's all fine and great. But if they don't hear God for themselves and do what God wants them to do, then they are stuck in this world. Good test of that is, what if God called them to another area, or God told them to do something? Well, if they're never hearing what God says, then they're never going to do it. So wouldn't you say that would be disobedience? Jesus said that, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I say? Why do Christians seem to just bypass words like that? Or what Jesus said, he who does the will of God lives forever. Why do we go past that verse and not think about it? Think, am I doing the will of God in my own life? Well, Christians can't think along those lines. You know why? It's because of their focus. Their focus is on the things that they got to do in this world, not focusing on the things of the Spirit. So, what is it that Christians are focusing on in this life? Yeah, you can go to church, you can read the Bible, but if you're not doing what God wants you to do, then you could say that you are stagnant in the Spirit. Are you producing fruit in the Spirit? Are you productive in the things of God? Or is your productivity in the things of this world? So, in the past, this was one of the many verses that I had memorized. And I think it was way before God put me to rest. These are just one of those things that, maybe you go to church and they give you a list of scriptures that you memorize. Well, this is one of the scriptures I memorized. And I had said in plenty of other videos, but here is the verse from 1 Corinthians 2:14. And this is the NIV version. The man without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness to him, and he cannot understand them because they are spiritually discerned. In the New American Standard Bible, instead of it saying the man, it says the natural person. So, Christians can choose to operate from the flesh by their focus. I mean, like I had said at the beginning, is Satan has been around a while, so he knows what can deter Christians. And he can deter people. If he can cause people to be angry with somebody, then he's accomplished their job, because in that anger is a separation. There is a division. And that's what he wants. He wants to divide people. He could do so by offense. So, like I had said, is that he can deter Christians from following God fully. He will do and use any kind of means to do that. So, not only does the enemy tempt us with areas of our weakness, but to follow the ways of mammon is a weakness to man as well, because it's tempting for man to pursue a job or a career that can bring them a lot of money. So when their focus is on such, then they become so busy that the Spirit in them is left dormant. You never spend time to hear God. You hardly pick up the word. So he can keep Christians so busy that they operate solely from the flesh, and then they see things from the flesh. Now, they could choose to see from the Spirit, but it takes, a shift in focus. And maybe God has tried to move Christians to that place to where they will surrender their life to him, and live by the Spirit. Maybe that's what God wants. Maybe God causes us to face hardship in our lives to bring us back to him. Why is it that when, sadly, tragedy occurs by the evil of people, well, why is it that when that happens, people are God-focused? Like the sad fact of 9/11, when that happened, America apparently became unified together. That for that small little bit, They became God focused. But after time passes, people resort back to doing what they did before. They live for themselves. They work to make money and stuff like that. You know, that's why I believe God causes revivals in different areas for people to switch that focus from the flesh to the spirit. So, I honestly believe that it takes that surrendering to get people back to God, to where they should be. Now, Nicodemus in John, I believe, chapter 3, was a religious teacher, but he was operating from the natural man. You know, yeah, he was a religious teacher. He knew about the scriptures and all that, but he was in a sect that was religious. But there was something about Jesus that touched his heart, that caused him to inquire, that there was more to life than what he was seeing. It reminds me of that movie Jesus of Nazareth, when when John walked up to him and he says, "I heard your words and I was moved from within myself, and the old scriptures came alive when you spoke." He says, "I don't want the scriptures to be tablets of dead stone. I want it to be real to me," or something like that. And so Nicodemus saw something in Jesus that the other religious leaders didn't, because they were so wrapped up in wealth and pride and all that. But Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea were the only two ones that really explored that new life through Jesus. And so Jesus, he didn't push Nicodemus away. He was giving him things from the Spirit of God, and he was helping him to see higher. So Jesus showed him that there are two ways to view. There's the natural way, and then there's the way of the Spirit. Jesus was speaking from the viewpoint of the Spirit. Now, Christians can live by the Spirit, but it takes a surrender of their lives. I didn't know that. I accepted Jesus in my heart, and I read the scriptures. I went to school. I went to Bible college. I went to church. Yet, my focus was still on the things of this world. I didn't truly live for God, because this world is like a film over the eyes of man. Like Saul in the book of Acts. He fell off his horse and was blinded by the light of Jesus. And that's more or less showing that, he had scales on his eyes, and those scales were the scales of this world that every person in this world has on them until they come to the realization of Jesus. Well, Christians further have a scale over their eyes until they surrender themselves to Jesus. And I'll get to that soon, by what I mean by that. Now, until I surrendered my will to Jesus, I was living like everybody else in the world. I was trying hard to be financially successful. I was trying to do this. I was trying to do that, until there was a culmination to where I just couldn't do it. I didn't have the understanding, and I didn't have the means to do so. I tried to go to school to be a graphic designer, but that fell through because that wasn't God's will for my life. God was trying to get me to that point to where I would surrender my will to him and live for him, so that I could do his will. Each of us has a will from God that he wants of us, but we're never going to reach that point until we surrender our wills to where we put up our life for him as a sacrifice. We're not going to do that until we sacrifice. So when I reached that culmination and I surrendered my life, you know, and that's such a cliche in the church, surrender your life to Jesus. Well, there's Christians that do that, yet still live for themselves and their desires. Well, God had to bring an end of that, of myself, to him so that I could live for him. So that night at the gazebo, I said, Lord, I can't do it anymore. You have to take over, because there's no way that I can achieve what this world is telling me. So at that moment, there was an exchange that took place. My life for his life. My will for his will. You know, it was no longer me pursuing any longer what I wanted in this world. My pursuance was what he wanted of me. That's the exchange that needs to take place in every life of a believer. You know, how many actually know what the will of God is for their lives? They're not going to know unless they surrender their will. You know, getting back to what I said, Christians can live by the Spirit, but it takes a surrender of their lives. Do you recall that man that went up to Jesus and said, I will follow you anywhere? Jesus said, foxes have holes, the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. He was showing him that this is the life that you're going to live. You know, you put up your comfort if you're going to follow me. Count the cost if you're going to follow me. Now, in order to surrender your will to God, there are 2 verses in the Bible. I'm sure that there's more. And it's Romans 12, verses 1 and 2. Therefore, in view of God's mercy, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Do not be conformed any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you can test and approve what God's will is, his perfect, pleasing, and acceptable will. Now, you may have to rewind that to hear that verse again, because in those 2 verses are a lot of things. These are what needs to be done in every life of a Christian, but they don't do so because their eyes are on this world, their focus is on this world, and how can they surrender unless they can see that for themselves? So the first thing is present your bodies as a sacrifice. You know, you're giving up what you want to do in this world and inquiring of God of what he wants of you. So it's like you're physically putting yourself on the altar, saying, Lord, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm going to follow you. I'm going to do what it takes to learn from you. Not only that you're my provider, but that you're my source for everything. You know, and it takes re-education, putting up everything that you've learned in this world and learning from God, according to John 6:45, I believe. Did you not know that you were to be taught by God? That's what God had taught me. You know, so each of us can learn from God. Each of us can be taught by God, but it takes sitting at his feet like Mary did. You know, not being so consumed with what the world throws at you every day like her sister Martha was. Mary chose to sit at Jesus' feet and learn from him. Are we willing to do so? Are we willing to do this every day, to sit at Jesus' feet and say, Lord, teach me. You know, teach me about this world. Teach me what is right and wrong in your eyes, and put up the right and wrong that I've learned in this world. So it said, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world. What is it Christians do? They're conforming to the world's ways of thinking and what they need to do in this world. This blinds them from surrendering their will to God. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So it takes that surrender to God, not living like the world does anymore. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Once that surrender takes place, God can teach you, and then your mind is renewed. And then you can test with that renewed mind what God's will is. He can easily show you what his will is for your life once you surrender to him and once your mind is renewed. So it takes, once you surrender, then you can truly see what you need to do. And that's what God had done in my life. I surrendered my will, I learned from him, and then I was seeing differently. Now, Christians give their life to God. Yeah, their life has changed, but it's not fully changed because they have not offered their bodies as a living sacrifice. Continually, daily living for God, truly living for God. You know, putting up their worldly aspirations, what they want to do, making money, doing this, doing that. No, I'm living for God. I'm hearing him. I'm going to follow what he wants, and he's going to be the one to guide me. So I just wanted to share that with you. I pray this video blessed you, and we're in this together. You know, if you're willing to sacrifice your will to God, then he will lead you. And maybe some of the stuff I had said doesn't make sense. Well, it takes really surrendering your will to God, living for him, and then it does make sense. You know, there are a lot of scriptures that I read that didn't make sense until I surrendered my will. So thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.